The council chambers had never been so quiet. 43 species representing thousands of worlds and trillions of beings sat in stunned silence as they processed what they had just witnessed. The main display screen still showed the Kepler Junction, where a single human ship waited patiently while 300 Draxian vessels continued their chaotic retreat. Council Director Femis was the first to speak. His translator converted his clicking speech into words, but his tone was unmistakable. He was deeply troubled. The Council will now hear from the human delegation. Ambassador Taemin, please approach the central podium. Taemin stood from his seat in the human section and walked calmly to the speaker's platform. He had prepared for this moment, but he had not expected it to happen quite so dramatically. He had thought the Draxians would at least fire a few shots before retreating. The fact that they had fled without exchanging any fire at all made the situation even more powerful. Members of the Council, Taemin began. 3 days ago you voted to strip humanity of our sovereign colonies. You did this without evidence of wrongdoing and without our consent. Today you sent a fleet to enforce that illegal vote. That fleet has retreated because its commanders understood a simple truth. Attacking humanity would cost more than any possible gain. A representative from the Karathi Federation, a species that looked like walking crystals, spoke up. Ambassador, your ship threatened the entire Draxian fleet. That is an act of war. No, Taemin said calmly. Captain Hyunwoo gave the Draxian fleet 30 seconds to retreat. They chose to retreat. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single ship was damaged. How is offering someone a chance to leave peacefully an act of war? The Karathi representative had no answer. High Arbiter Velk stood from his section, his raptor features twisted with rage. You humiliated us, in front of the entire council. The Draxian Confederacy will not forget this insult. With respect, High Arbiter, Taemin replied, you humiliated yourselves. You came to take our worlds with overwhelming force, expecting us to surrender without resistance. When we showed we could defend ourselves, you chose to retreat. That was your choice, not ours. One ship. Velk's voice rose to a roar. You had one ship against our 300, and you claim that as a fair defense? Taemin smiled slightly. You just argued that you needed 300 ships to take our colonies. Are you now saying our single ship is equivalent to your entire fleet? Because if so, that suggests humanity's military capabilities are far beyond what you estimated. The logic trap closed perfectly. If Velk admitted the human ship was a genuine threat, he confirmed humanity was much stronger than anyone believed. If he claimed it was not a threat, then his fleet's retreat looked even worse. Velk sat down, seething in silence. Council Director Femis raised one claw for order. This council requires answers. Ambassador Taemin, what exactly does humanity have aboard that vessel? What weapons could possibly threaten an entire fleet? I'm not at liberty to discuss classified military technology, Taemin said. But I can arrange for an expert to provide a general briefing if the council wishes. We wish, Femis said flatly. 2 hours later, Professor Yoonji stood at the same podium. She was younger than Taemin, barely 40 years old, with sharp eyes that suggested she understood things most people could not even imagine. She taught xenotechnology at Earth's premier military academy, and had helped design several of the systems aboard the Indomitable. Good afternoon, she said, her tone pleasant as if she were teaching a classroom of students. I've been asked to explain human military philosophy and how it differs from council approaches to warfare. She activated a holographic display. 2 ships appeared side by side. One was a massive Draxian capital ship, bristling with weapons and armored plating. The other was the Indomitable, sleek and compact. This is a typical council warship. It weighs approximately 4 million tons, carries a crew of 3,000, and mounts 200 weapon systems. It's designed to look intimidating and to survive prolonged combat through heavy armor and redundant systems. The display shifted to highlight the human ship. This is a human cruiser. It weighs 800,000 tons, carries a crew of 200, and mounts 600 weapon systems. Silence fell across the chamber. Several representatives checked their translation devices, certain they had misheard. 600 weapons on a ship that size? Asked a representative from the Belkari species. That's impossible. The power requirements alone are handled by a fusion reactor running at efficiencies council technology cannot match, Yoonji interrupted politely. Humanity has spent the last 50 years developing power generation, weapons miniaturization, and targeting systems. While Council species built bigger ships, we built smarter ones. She changed the display to show weapon specifications. Our railguns fire projectiles at 0.07 times the speed of light. Our missiles carry plasma warheads capable of melting through any known armor. Our laser arrays can focus on targets from half a light second away with pinpoint accuracy. And our targeting computers can track and engage 300 separate targets simultaneously. Admiral Kwang Soon, the Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces, appeared on the screen via remote communication from Earth. He was an older man, his hair gray but his eyes sharp and alert. "Members of the Council," he said, "I want to be very clear about something. The Indomitable is a standard patrol cruiser. It is not our most powerful ship. It is not even in the top 10. We have 30 vessels more advanced than it, and we're building more every year." The Council erupted in noise. Representatives shouted questions in dozens of languages. The translation systems struggled to keep up. FEMAS called for order, but it took several minutes for the chaos to subside. When quiet finally returned, a small voice spoke up. It came from the Ventrian section, a species of amphibious beings that had been conquered by the Draxians 15 years earlier. "If humanity has such power," the Ventrian asked quietly, "why did you not use it before? Why did you wait until you were threatened?" Taman stepped forward again. This was the question he had been waiting for. "Because we don't want to use it," he said simply. "Humanity learned a hard lesson in our own history. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire world. We came very close to using them several times. But we survived, and we learned that having power means choosing carefully when to use it." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of various representatives. "We joined the Council hoping to find peace and cooperation among the stars. For 20 years, we've been peaceful members. We've traded fairly, shared technology within legal limits, and caused no trouble. But the Council has mistaken our peace for weakness. Today we corrected that misunderstanding. So you'll threaten us whenever we disagree with you?" Felk challenged. "No," Taman said firmly. "We will defend ourselves when attacked. There's a difference. You came to our territory with military force to take our worlds. We stopped you. That's not aggression. That's self-defense." FEMAS stood, his posture suggesting deep thought. "This Council must deliberate on these matters. We will reconvene tomorrow to vote on the colony situation and to discuss new security arrangements." As the session ended and representatives began to leave, many of them looked at the human delegation with new eyes. Fear, yes, but also respect, and perhaps the beginning of genuine understanding. In a private chamber, several species representatives met in secret. The Karathi, the Ventrians, and 3 other species that had been bullied by the Draxians over the years. "Did you see Velk's face?" the Karathi representative asked. "They finally know what it's like to be threatened." "The question is," the Ventrian said, "can we trust the humans? What if they become the new Draxians? What if they use their power to dominate us?" They all considered this. Finally, the Karathi spoke again. "The humans could have destroyed the Draxian fleet. They had the targeting locks, the weapons, everything. But they didn't fire. They gave them a chance to retreat. When was the last time the Draxians gave anyone that choice?" The others had no answer. Because the Draxians never had. Aboard the Indomitable, Captain Hyunwoo read the reports from the Council chambers. Commander Ji-won stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. "They're scared of us now," she said. "Good," Hyunwoo replied. "Fear keeps people honest. But we need to show them there's something more important than our weapons." "What's that?" "Our willingness not to use them unless we have to." Ji-won nodded slowly. "That's a harder lesson to teach, I know," Hyunwoo said. "But it's the most important one." Captain Vresh stared at the countdown timer on his tactical display. 28 seconds, 27. Each second felt like an eternity. His second in command, a young warrior named Crix, turned to him with confusion in his eyes. "Sir, surely we're not actually retreating. The High Arbiter will consider it cowardice. We outnumber them 300 to 1. Fresh did not answer immediately. His claws tapped against his command chair as he studied the data streaming across his screens. The human ship remained motionless at the center of their formation, a small blue dot surrounded by the red icons of his fleet. But that small dot was connected to 1,800 targeting lines spreading out like a spider's web to touch every Draxian vessel. "Tell me, Crix," Vresh said quietly. "What happens if we attack?" "We destroy them, sir. Even if they fire first, we have 300 ships. They can't kill us all before we overwhelm them with return fire. Run a combat simulation. Full parameters. Include the weapon signatures our sensors are detecting. Crix input the commands. The simulation ran in seconds, processing millions of variables. The results appeared on the main screen. Crix went very still. Rated aloud. Fresh ordered. Fleet casualties. 93%. Estimated time to engage, 4.7 seconds. Estimated time until fleet combat effectiveness drops below critical threshold, 6.2 seconds. Crix's voice shook slightly. Sir, the computer is saying they could destroy our entire fleet in less than 10 seconds. 15 seconds remained on the countdown. Admiral Threxis sat in his command center aboard the fleet flagship, surrounded by his senior officers. They were arguing loudly, their clicking speech overlapping in a cacophony of confusion and fear. We cannot retreat. The High Arbiter has ordered us to capture the human ship. The humans are bluffing. No ship can do what their sensors claim. If we retreat, we'll be disgraced. Sent to guard the outer colonies like common patrol ships. Threxis raised one claw for silence. The arguing stopped immediately. He had commanded fleets for longer than most of these officers had been alive. He had fought in 18 major campaigns and never lost a single battle. His tactical instincts had kept him alive through situations that killed lesser commanders. And right now, every one of those instincts was screaming at him to run. Status of Council Observer Yilix, he asked. One of his communication officers answered. Still broadcasting live to the council chambers, sir. Every member species is watching. Threxis considered his options. If he retreated, he would be humiliated in front of the entire council. The Draxian Confederacy would lose face. High Arbiter Velk would probably have him executed for cowardice. But if he attacked and the humans were not bluffing, he would lose 93% of his fleet. 300 ships and their crews destroyed in seconds. It would be the worst military disaster in Draxian history. 10 seconds. High Arbiter Velk stood in his private command ship, watching the situation unfold through multiple screens. One screen showed the tactical situation. Another showed the live feed from Council Observer Yilix. A third displayed the reactions from the council chambers, where representatives from 43 species watched with varying degrees of shock, fear, and fascination. Admiral Threxis is hesitating, one of his advisors said. Should we order him to attack? Velk's claws clenched. This entire operation was supposed to be simple. A show of overwhelming force. The humans would see 300 ships and surrender immediately, just like the Karathi had 5 years ago, just like the Ventrian before them, just like dozens of other species who realized they could not stand against Draxian military power. But the humans were not surrendering. They were not even afraid. One of his tactical analysts pulled up historical data on human warfare. High Arbiter, I think you should see this. We've analyzed human military history from their databases. Images appeared on the screen. Ancient human wars fought with primitive weapons. But the scale was staggering. Humans had fought wars that killed millions of their own species. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. And in every major conflict, they had demonstrated a particular pattern. They don't fight to win, the analyst said. They fight to ensure their enemy can never threaten them again. Look at this. In their Second World War, they developed nuclear weapons. The moment they had them, they used them. Not on military targets alone, on entire cities. To prove a point. They wouldn't, Velk said, but his voice lacked conviction. They already have High Arbiter, against their own species. What do you think they'll do to us? 5 seconds. Council Observer Yilix floated in his containment field aboard his observation vessel. His species had no solid form, existing instead as a collective consciousness within a bubble of exotic matter. He could perceive events on multiple levels simultaneously, seeing both the physical movements of the ships and the electromagnetic chatter of their communications. He was also recording everything and transmitting it in real time to the council. Chambers, the council director Femis, had ordered him to witness what was supposed to be a routine enforcement action. The humans would be taught to respect council authority. It would be over in an hour, maybe less. Instead, Yilix was watching something unprecedented. The humans had called the Draxians' bluff with a bigger bluff. Or was it a bluff? His sensors could detect the energy signatures coming from the human ship. They were genuine. Whatever weapons that ship carried, they were active and ready to fire. He adjusted his transmission to include detailed sensor data. The Council needed to see this. They needed to understand what the humans had built. 3 seconds. On the bridge of the Indomitable, the crew waited in silence. Commander Jiwan watched her targeting solutions, her finger hovering over the firing controls. If the Draxians moved forward, if even one of their ships powered up weapons, she would fire. Her orders were clear. Lieutenant Sung Ho had stopped breathing. He stared at his engineering readouts, watching the massive power flow through the ship's systems. The reactor was running at 110% capacity, channeling incredible amounts of energy into weapons that terrified him, even though he helped maintain them. Ensign Dayun monitored all communications channels. She could hear the chatter between Draxian ships. They were afraid. She could hear it in the way their translator AI struggled to convert their clicking speech into standard language. The aliens were arguing about what to do. Captain Hyunwoo stood at the center of his bridge, his expression calm. He had known it would come to this. The Draxians were bullies, and bullies only understood one language: strength. Not the strength to destroy, but the strength to choose not to destroy. 1 second. Admiral Threxus made his decision. All ships, he broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. Begin retreat maneuvers. Fall back to minimum safe distance. The fleet responded immediately. 300 warships moving in perfect synchronization began to reverse course. Their massive engines flared with light as they accelerated away from the human vessel. The countdown reached 0. Nothing happened. Hyunwoo had not given the order to fire. He stood watching the Draxian fleet retreat, their formation dissolving as ships scattered in different directions. Some of them were moving so fast they risked collision with each other. "They're running," Sung Ho whispered in disbelief. "No," Jiwan corrected. "They're surviving. They ran the same calculations we did. They know what would happen if we fought." High Arbiter Velk watched his fleet retreat in disorder and felt something crack inside his chest. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The Draxian Confederacy did not retreat. They did not back down from inferior species, but they had, because the humans had shown them something worse than defeat: annihilation. In the council chambers, 43 species watched in stunned silence as the most powerful military fleet in the known galaxy fled from a single human ship. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Everything they thought they knew about power, about warfare, about humanity, had just been proven wrong. Council observer Yilix transmitted his final report. The Draxian fleet has withdrawn. The human vessel took no hostile action. Captain Hyunwoo appears to be awaiting further council response. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Hyunwoo finally allowed himself to breathe. The gamble had worked. They had not needed to fire a single shot. "Stand down weapons," he ordered quietly. "Maintain yellow alert. And someone please tell Earth Command that we're still here." Jiwan smiled slightly as she powered down the targeting systems. Message sent. "They're going to want a full report." "I know," Hyunwoo said. He looked out at the stars where the Draxian fleet was still fleeing. "I just showed the galaxy what happens when you corner a human. Now we'll see if they're smart enough to learn from it." The single word hung in the silence of space. Admiral Threxus stared at the human captain through the communication screen, his compound eyes reflecting confusion and growing irritation. In 300 years of military service, no one had ever simply said no to his demands. "You refuse?" Threxus asked, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless words. "You understand that you face 300 warships? Your single vessel cannot possibly survive." Captain Hyunwoo remained seated, his expression neutral. "We understand our situation perfectly. Do you understand yours?" The communication cut off. Threxus had no patience for what he considered suicide by arrogance. He turned to his tactical officers and gave the order to surround the human ship. The Draxian fleet began moving into an encirclement formation. 300 massive vessels spreading out like a closing fist. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Commander Jiwan watched the enemy fleet maneuver. Her screens showed their movements in real time, tracking each ship's position, speed, and weapon status. The Draxian formation was textbook council warfare. Overwhelming force applied from all directions simultaneously. "They're positioning for a capture operation," she said. "They want to board us intact." Lieutenant Sung Ho spoke from the engineering station, his voice tight with tension. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted," Hyunwoo said. How are we supposed to stop 300 ships? I know our weapons are good, but the math doesn't work. Even if we destroyed one ship every 10 seconds, they'd reach us before we could. Lieutenant, Hyunwoo interrupted gently. What did they teach you at the academy about human military doctrine? Sung-ho blinked, confused by the question. Sir, they taught us that human doctrine prioritizes efficiency and force multiplication. That we build smaller ships with more advanced technology. That's the sanitized version they tell civilians, Ji-won said, still focused on her screens. The real doctrine has a different name. We call it overwhelming response. Ensign Da-eun turned from her communication station. She had been quiet throughout the approach, but now she spoke up. I read about it in the Academy Library. During Earth's last World War, humans developed nuclear weapons. They didn't just build enough to defeat their enemies. They built enough to destroy their enemies 100 times over. Even when everyone knew it was excessive, we kept building more. Because deterrence only works if the other side believes you're serious, Hyunwoo finished. The Council species never learned that lesson. They build ships to look impressive, to intimidate their opponents into surrender. But humans? We build ships to kill. Sung-ho looked around the bridge, seeing the compact design with new eyes. Every system was built for efficiency. There were no grand observation decks or luxury quarters like Council ships had. Every cubic meter of the Indomitable served a purpose. Every system fed into the ship's primary function, projecting lethal force. Sir, Ji-won said, the Draxian fleet is in position. They're forming a complete sphere around us. Range is decreasing. They'll be in boarding distance in 20 minutes. Hyunwoo stood and walked to the tactical display. The holographic sphere showed their ship as a small blue dot in the center, surrounded by hundreds of red enemy contacts. It looked hopeless. It was meant to look hopeless. Status of all weapon systems? He asked. Ji-won pulled up a different screen. Railgun batteries charged and ready. Missile tubes loaded with plasma warheads. Point defense grid active. Laser arrays, capacitors at full charge. And the Hellfire missiles are armed and awaiting your authorization. Hellfire missiles? Sung-ho asked. I thought those were still experimental. They were, Hyunwoo said. Until 3 months ago. Now they're standard armament on all human warships. He did not elaborate. The Hellfire missiles were classified, and for good reason. When other species discovered what they were capable of, the Council would have questions. Many questions. A new communication request came through. This time it was not Admiral Threxus, but High Arbiter Velk himself. The Draxian leader appeared on screen. His raptor features twisted into what his species considered a friendly expression. To humans, it looked like a predator baring its teeth. Captain Hyunwoo, Velk said, you have demonstrated courage, which my people respect. But courage without wisdom is simply suicide. Stand down. Allow us to board your vessel, and you and your crew will be treated with honor as prisoners of war. And if we refuse? Hyunwoo asked. Then you will die, and your species will learn the price of defying the Council. Your choice is simple. Surrender or destruction. Hyunwoo looked at his crew. Ji-won met his eyes and gave a small nod. Sung-ho swallowed hard but did not look away. Daeun's hands were steady on her console. Commander Ji-won, Hyunwoo said formally, activate all targeting systems. I want a firing solution on every enemy vessel. Sir? Velk's voice carried genuine surprise. You cannot be serious. You are one ship against 300. Ji-won's fingers flew across her console. Systems that had been running in standby mode suddenly came to full power. The Indomitable lit up like a small star as every sensor, every targeting computer, every weapon system activated simultaneously. Targeting solutions locked, Ji-won reported. All 300 enemy vessels are painted. Weapons ready to fire on your command. What happened next would be analyzed by military strategists across the galaxy for decades to come. Every Draxian ship received the same alert at the same moment. Their threat detection systems, built to warn them when enemy weapons were aimed at them, suddenly screamed an alarm. Not one alarm, hundreds of alarms. The small human ship had just targeted all 300 Draxian vessels simultaneously. Not with one weapon each, with multiple weapons. Each Draxian capital ship found itself locked by no fewer than 6 different targeting systems from the single human vessel. Captain Vresh commanded, one of the Draxian scout ships on the outer edge of the formation. He stared at his tactical screen in disbelief as his computer calculated the threat assessment. The human ship had enough active weapons locks to engage his entire fleet simultaneously. That should not be possible. No single ship in Council history had ever mounted that much firepower. Run the analysis again, Vresh ordered his tactical officer. The officer's clawed hands shook as he input the commands. Sir, the computer confirms. The human vessel has 1,800 active targeting locks. That's 6 per ship. The weapon signatures are unusual. Some of them match no known technology in our database. Vresh felt something his species rarely experienced: fear. Not fear of dying in battle, which was honorable. Fear of what those weapons might do if they fired. What's the kill probability? He asked quietly. The tactical officer hesitated. Sir, the computer estimates that if the human ship fires all weapons, our fleet survival rate is less than 5%. Most of our ships would be destroyed before we could return fire. Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. Admiral Threxus received reports from all of his commanders. The humans had not just aimed weapons at them. They had demonstrated the capability to destroy the entire Draxian fleet before the battle even began. High Arbiter Velk watched from his command ship, orbiting safely several light minutes away. He saw the tactical data and felt his confidence begin to crack. This was not possible. Humans were a new species, barely a century into their space age. They should not have this level of technology. It's a bluff, he told his advisors. They're trying to scare us with sensor tricks. No single ship can do what their targeting systems claim. But his advisors were not so sure. One of them pulled up historical records of human warfare. What they found was disturbing. In every major conflict in human history, humans had demonstrated a willingness to use overwhelming force. They did not fight to achieve victory. They fought to ensure their enemies could never threaten them again. On the Indomitable, Hyunwoo opened a communications channel to the entire Draxian fleet. His voice was calm, almost friendly. This is Captain Hyunwoo of the United Nations Space Command. You have 30 seconds to begin retreat maneuvers. If any ship powers weapons or advances toward our position, we will consider it an act of war. I want to be very clear about something. Humanity does not bluff. We do not make threats we are not willing to carry out. You have 30 seconds. The countdown began. In the void of space, 300 warships hung motionless, their crews frozen in shock and fear. They had come to intimidate a weaker species. Instead, they had glimpsed something that terrified them: a human warship at full combat readiness. And for the first time in Draxian history, their fleet did not know what to do. The conference hall of Council Station Sigma stretched half a kilometer in diameter. Representatives from 43 different species sat in their designated sections, their bodies as varied as the stars themselves. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some stood on legs, others floated in containment fields. But they all shared one thing in common. They believed they controlled the galaxy. Ambassador Taemin stood at the human podium, his dark suit crisp and his expression calm. He had known this day would come. For 20 years, humanity had played the role of the junior partner, the new species that smiled and nodded and followed the rules. But the Galactic Council had mistaken patience for weakness. The vote is concluded, announced Council Director Femis, his translator converting his clicking speech into words the various species could understand. By a count of 38 to 5, the Council has determined that human colonial holdings in the Outer Rim will be transferred to Draxian administration for proper management and protection. Taemin did not move. He had expected this result. The Draxians had been building support for months, promising favors and threatening consequences. The Council operated on deals made in shadows, and humanity was too new to have built the necessary alliances. High Arbiter Velk rose from the Draxian section. His species resembled the raptors from Earth's ancient past, though they stood 3 meters tall and wore armor that gleamed like polished bronze. His eyes fixed on Taemin with something that looked like satisfaction. The Council has spoken with wisdom, Velk said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. Humanity's colonies are poorly defended and vulnerable to pirate attacks. The Draxian Confederacy will provide proper security and governance. Your people should be grateful for our generosity. Taemin smiled slightly. It was not a warm expression. The vote is illegal, he said quietly. According to Council Charter Article 7, member species cannot be stripped of sovereign territory without evidence of criminal activity or voluntary surrender. You have provided neither. Femis's translator buzzed with what might have been irritation. Ambassador Taemin, the council has voted. The matter is settled. No, Taemin said. The matter is not settled. I formally reject this vote and demand it be reversed within 7 standard days. The chamber erupted. Several species shouted in their native languages. The translator system struggled to keep up with the chaos. No junior member had ever rejected a council vote before. It simply was not done. Velk's laughter cut through the noise. You reject the council? You who command barely 50 worlds? The Draxian Confederacy controls 3,000 systems. Our fleet numbers in the tens of thousands. What will you do, little human? Will you fight us? Taemin gathered his documents and prepared to leave. Before he exited, he turned back to face the chamber. 7 days, he repeated. If the vote is not reversed, you will discover what humans do when we are pushed. The doors closed behind him, leaving the council in chaos. 3 days later, Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the UNSC Indomitable, watching the stars streak past as his ship traveled toward the Kepler junction at faster than light speeds. The bridge was smaller than those on council ships. Humans had never believed in wasting space on unnecessary comfort. Status report, Hyunwoo said. Commander Ji-won looked up from her tactical station. Her short hair was pulled back efficiently, and her eyes showed no emotion as she read the data scrolling across her screens. Draxian fleet composition confirmed. 300 capital ships, standard council design, heavy plasma cannons, kinetic barriers, fusion missiles. They're organized in the traditional wall formation. Hyunwoo nodded. The council species had been fighting the same way for thousands of years. They built enormous ships, packed them with weapons, and flew them in tight formations that looked impressive but made them vulnerable to concentrated fire. And we're still alone? He asked. Affirmative. Command confirmed that no other human vessels will reach the junction in time. We're the only ship that can intercept. Lieutenant Sung-ho spoke up from the engineering station. He was young, only 26, and this was his first real combat deployment. Sir, the odds are 300 to 1. Even with our advantages, how can we possibly— We don't need to win, Hyunwoo interrupted gently. We just need to make them understand that attacking us would cost more than they're willing to pay. Ensign Da-eun turned from her communications console. Her voice was steady despite her youth. Sir, we're receiving broadcasts from Council Observer Yilix. They're streaming the entire encounter live to the council chambers. The galaxy is watching? Good, Hyunwoo said. Let them watch. Ji-won pulled up a holographic display of the Kepler junction. The junction was a natural convergence point, where multiple faster-than-light transit lanes intersected. Any fleet wanting to reach human space from Draxian territory had to pass through here. It was a perfect choke point. The Draxians will arrive in 4 hours, she said. They're not even trying to hide their approach. They want us to see them coming, Hyunwoo understood. This was meant to be a show of force, a demonstration that would cow humanity into submission. The Draxians had done this dozens of times before to other species. They would arrive with overwhelming numbers, demand surrender, and the smaller species would have no choice but to comply. But the Draxians had never fought humans before. Begin combat preparations, Hyunwoo ordered. Charge all weapon systems. Activate full sensor suites. I want every system ready the moment they arrive. The crew moved with practiced efficiency. Sung-ho brought the reactor to full power, feeding energy into systems that hummed with barely contained force. Da-eun established secure communication channels with Earth Command. Ji-won armed every weapon the Indomitable carried. The ship was not large by council standards. At just under 800 meters, it was dwarfed by the massive Draxian capital ships that measured over 2 kilometers each. But size had never been humanity's priority. Hyunwoo walked to the forward viewport and stared out at the stars. Somewhere beyond the darkness, 300 ships were coming to take what humanity had built. They thought humans would surrender because that was what weaker species did. They thought their numbers guaranteed victory because that was how council warfare worked. They were about to learn that humans played by different rules. Sir, Ji-won said quietly, standing beside him. If this goes wrong, if we have to actually fight them, then we fight, Hyunwoo said simply. And we make sure they never underestimate humanity again. The clock counted down. 4 hours became 3, then 2, then 1. The crew remained at their stations, silent and focused. This was what they had trained for, what every human soldier had trained for since Earth joined the Council. The moment when someone would test them. The moment when they would have to prove that humanity was not prey. The sensors chimed. Dayun's voice was calm. Contact, Draxian fleet emerging from faster-than-light transit. 300 ships confirmed. Hyunwoo returned to his command chair. Show me. The main screen filled with contacts. 300 red icons appeared in perfect formation, arranged in walls of steel and firepower. They moved with the confidence of a species that had never known defeat. They're hailing us, Dayun reported. Put them through. The screen changed to show Admiral Threxus, his insectoid features rendered in high definition. His compound eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. Human vessel, you are ordered to stand down and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with destruction. Hyunwoo leaned forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every human who had ever refused to kneel. No. The council chambers reopened exactly 24 hours after the confrontation at Kepler Junction. The atmosphere had changed dramatically. Where before there had been casual confidence, now there was tension. Representatives who normally spent the pre-session time socializing instead huddled in their species groups, speaking in worried tones. Ambassador Tae-min sat in the human section, his expression calm. He had spent the night in communication with Earth Command, discussing strategy and possible outcomes. They had war-gamed dozens of scenarios, but they all came down to one simple question. Would the Council learn from what happened, or would fear drive them to make an even worse decision? Council Director Femus called the session to order. His translator rendered his speech with unusual gravity. This council has deliberated through the night. We have reviewed all data from the Kepler Junction incident. We have consulted with military experts from 17 species, and we have reached several conclusions. He paused, his alien features difficult to read but his posture suggesting deep discomfort. First, the Council's vote to seize human colonial holdings was premature and poorly considered. The vote is hereby reversed. Human sovereignty over their colonies is confirmed and will not be challenged again without clear evidence of criminal activity. A murmur ran through the chamber. Felk remained seated, his raptor features frozen in barely controlled rage, but he did not object. His fleet's retreat had cost him too much political capital. Second, Femus continued, this council must address a larger problem. The confrontation at Kepler Junction revealed that our understanding of human military capabilities was dangerously incomplete. This raises an important question. What else do we not know about humanity? And more critically, what do we not know about our own assumptions regarding power and security? This was unexpected. Taemin had prepared for many responses, but not for genuine self-reflection from the council. A new voice spoke up. It came from Representative Ikara of the Belkari species, a mammalian race known for their diplomatic skills. Council Director, if I may, I believe we must acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. For thousands of years, this council has operated on a simple principle. Larger militaries dominate smaller ones. We have allowed powerful species like the Draxians to intimidate weaker ones because we believed it maintained stability. But humanity has demonstrated that this principle is flawed. How so? Asked a representative from the insectoid Hravik species. Because humanity did not seek to dominate anyone, Sakara said. They built their military in secret, not to conquer others, but to ensure no one could conquer them. They joined our council peacefully. They traded fairly. They caused no conflicts. And when we tried to take their worlds by force, they stopped us without firing a shot. This suggests a completely different approach to power than we are accustomed to. Femus nodded slowly. Representative Ikara raises a valid point. This leads to our third conclusion. The council requires reform. We propose the creation of a new treaty framework that protects member species sovereignty while maintaining collective security. Ambassador Taemin stood. May I speak? The council recognizes Ambassador Taemin. Taemin walked to the central podium. He had prepared these words carefully, knowing they would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations. Thank you, Council Director. Humanity appreciates the reversal of the illegal vote. But we agree that something larger is needed. For 20 years, we have observed how this council operates. We have seen strong species bully weaker ones. We have seen votes decided by threats rather than reason. We have seen justice delayed because enforcement requires military force that only a few species possess. He paused, letting his words sink in. Humanity proposes a new framework. We call it the Kepler Accords, named after the place where everything changed. The Accords would establish 3 core principles: A holographic display appeared showing the proposed framework. First, absolute sovereignty. No member species can have their territory seized or their government interfered with, except in cases of proven genocide, slavery, or similar crimes against sapient life. And such cases must be proven to an independent tribunal, not simply voted on by species with political interests. Several representatives nodded. The Ventrians, who had lost their independence to the Draxians, looked particularly interested. Second, collective defense. Any attack on one member species is considered an attack on all. But this defense is voluntary. Species can choose to participate or abstain based on their own judgment of the situation. And third, Themis asked, technology sharing. Humanity will share certain defensive technologies with Council members, not our most advanced weapons, but systems for shields, sensors, and point defense, enough that every species can defend their own territory effectively. The chamber erupted. Several representatives shouted questions. Others argued among themselves. High Arbiter Velk stood and pointed one claw at Tae-Min. Why would you share your technology? What do you gain from making potential enemies stronger? Tae-Min smiled slightly. Because we don't want enemies, High Arbiter. We want partners. Strong partners who can defend themselves don't need to be afraid. And people who aren't afraid make better decisions. A new voice joined the discussion. Admiral Kwang Soon appeared on the main screen again, speaking from Earth. Let me be clear about humanity's position, he said. We did not build our military to conquer anyone. We built it because our history taught us that peace requires strength. But strength without wisdom leads to tyranny, and we refuse to become tyrants. He looked directly at the camera, his expression serious. Humanity offers the Council a choice. We can continue as we have been, with strong species dominating weak ones until someone stronger comes along. Or we can build something better, a true alliance where every species has the capability to defend itself and the wisdom to choose peace when possible. Ambassador Min Seo, the human military liaison, stood next. She was younger than Tae-Min, a former military officer who understood both warfare and diplomacy. The Council should understand what humanity is offering, she said. We could use our military advantage to demand concessions. We could force favorable trade agreements or seize territory like the Draxians tried to do. But we won't. Because that's not the galaxy we want to live in. The Ventrian representative raised one webbed hand. Ambassador, forgive my suspicion, but your species is unknown to most of us. How can we trust that you mean what you say? How do we know you won't change your mind once we're dependent on your technology? It was a fair question. Tae-Min had expected it. You can't know for certain, he admitted. Trust must be built over time through actions, not just words. But consider this, we had Captain Hyunwoo and the Indomitable at Kepler Junction. We had targeting locks on 300 Draxian ships. We could have destroyed them all and claimed self-defense. But we didn't fire. We gave them the choice to leave peacefully. That action should tell you something about our intentions. Themis stood, clearly deep in thought. The Council will now vote on whether to adopt the Kepler Accords as proposed by the human delegation. This is a historic moment. We are voting on more than a treaty. We are voting on what kind of galactic civilization we want to be. The vote took an hour. Species caucused in their sections, debating among themselves. The Draxians argued against it, but their influence had weakened. The smaller species, those who had been bullied for centuries, spoke passionately in favor. Finally, Themis announced the results. By a vote of 39-4, the Council adopts the Kepler Accords. The framework will be drafted over the coming months with input from all member species. Ambassador Tae-Min, humanity is recognized as a full and equal partner in this new council. The chamber filled with complex emotions. Relief from smaller species. Resentment from the Draxians and a few others who preferred the old system. And from most species, a cautious hope that things might actually improve. As the session ended, High Arbiter Velk approached Tae-Min. The Draxian leader's raptor features were difficult to read, but his posture suggested grudging respect. You won today, human. But know this, the Draxian Confederacy has a long memory. We do not forget being humiliated. Tae-Min met his eyes steadily. We didn't humiliate you, High Arbiter. You made a choice to retreat rather than die. That was wisdom, not humiliation. I hope someday you'll see the difference. Velk turned and left without another word. 3 days later, Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as another human warship. The UNSC Relentless arrived at Kepler Junction. Captain Bora commanded the newer vessel, and she appeared on the communication screen with a smile. "Looks like you had an interesting week, Hyun-woo." "That's an understatement," he replied. "Status of the relief operation? We're here to take over patrol duties. You and your crew are ordered back to Earth for debriefing and probably about 1,000 medal ceremonies." Commander Ji-won laughed quietly. "I hate medal ceremonies." "Too bad," Bora said. "You just changed galactic history. The brass is going to want to talk about it for months." Hyun-woo looked out at the stars. The Kepler junction was quiet now, just another piece of space. But it would be remembered as the place where humanity showed the galaxy what it meant to have power and choose not to abuse it.